even though Natalie and Stephanie got there first, Joseph and his brother gave the passports to the guy first, and so they kind of screwed Natalie over, which was kind of what Natalie gets for the last episode, still wanting to be so pro-alliance. So that was actually good to see. Yo, 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 yo! Back to talk about another episode of The Amazing Race. I believe we made it to episode 7. It feels like we're winding down, but it's only been 7 episodes. I don't know how much episodes there are of the show, but there can't be too much more. We're down to what? Like 6 teams after this? In this episode last night, they went to Romania. Shout out to the couple people I know in Romania who probably won't watch this. But if they happen to, what up? I think I'm just going to go over my thoughts on all the teams in order per usual, in order of they placed, of where they placed. So we're going to start with first place. They started first place. They ended first place for the 4th week in a row. Getting a little redundant, but I guess I would rather it be them than Jag and Jazz. It is Tucker and Eric. The main thing that stood out at the beginning was how little Tucker was bummed about Rubina being eliminated. We talked about this last week, how it seemed like this relationship between Tucker and Rubina had to have been on their last legs because Rubina wasn't rooting for Tucker to win, and Tucker didn't seem to care that Rubina might have gotten eliminated. And now he finds out in last night's episode that Rubina got eliminated. He said he was bummed in confessional, but he did not seem bummed at all. So just very strange couple that they were. One of those showmances from Big Brother that I don't think had a lot of legs to it. They ended up finding this out because at one point one of the stops was they basically had to like all bunk together like it was summer camp, which was fun. That's when we got to see Izzy finally rub it in Jag and Jass's face that they were still in the game. We didn't get a dramatic confrontation like I was kind of hoping for, but I am glad that Izzy at least got to rub that in Jag's face, that their plan to U-turn them and eliminate them did not work. As for Tucker and Eric, though, kind of like always, they did everything the best. The first challenge was to herd some sheep, where they had to herd just 5 sheep away from the rest of the pack into a smaller area. And they had like blue painted on the sheep that they had to get in. And they just had to get those sheep. But, you know, sheep have that flock mentality, which is why we all call people sheep, especially in this day and age. There's a lot of sheep out there. So they had to separate this sheep from the rest of the flock. And Tucker and Eric did it best. I guess they had worked on like a ranch before. So, of course, Tucker and Eric had experience with farm animals. So, of course, Tucker and Eric was going to be able to do the best of this. Then they had to go make a pontoon to put together and get onto this lake to get the clue that was in the water. They did that fastest, although they arrived first, so it's not surprising that they did that fastest. And then they got a choice to either go make ship bricks or to go make art masks that had to be exactly the same as these other masks. Much like almost every team except for one, they chose to go make the bricks they had to make out of animal manure. And they had to make 10 different bricks, and they had to be perfect. And it was probably a lot harder than it seemed, which I'm glad. This is one of those cases where I do feel like it was fair. You know, I complained 2 weeks ago that I didn't like how it seemed like there was the physical challenges was way easier than the other challenges. This challenge, both were hard because on first go, 3 of their bricks were not made right, so they had to do that over. But nonetheless, despite 3 of their bricks not being right on the first try, they still finished the bricks first, and they got first place again for the 4th week in a row. They are the team to beat, to say the least. But I do think the only other team that gives them hell is, unfortunately, Jag and Jazz, who finished second place again. You know, Jag and Jazz, I feel like, have always almost been first or second. I think there was maybe 1 week they were in third. So they're definitely the team that I think contends best with Tucker and Eric. The challenge I didn't talk about was skydiving, and that was, I think, after they had to share the bunks on that first night in Romania, which is when Izzy got to confront Jeg and Jess. And then they finished fourth at one point with the sheep. They ended up working with Taylor and Kyland, so I guess I'll be a little easier on Taylor than I've been so far this season, because one of my main complaints about Taylor's game was she helped Jag and Jazz the first week, giving them a possible future pass, and then haven't worked with them ever since. So it seemed like Taylor just did that for nothing, helping one of the strongest teams in the competition get an advantage. But Jag and Jazz did work together to help Taylor and Kyland here a little bit. I don't know if they were the best help necessarily, but at least they agreed to help Taylor, so I guess I could be a little easier on Taylor where it comes to her and Jag. Jag and Jess got lost for the first time after the pontoon when they had to go find the bricks. But they still finished the bricks very quickly. I think they're like the only team that got the bricks on the first try. And now that they finished second behind Eric and Tucker, they are talking about how maybe they need to use their express pass to get ahead of Tucker and Eric, and maybe try and mess with Tucker and Eric if they can. So Jag and Jazz thinking strategically about how they need to defeat Tucker and Eric. And I don't think Tucker and Eric think strategically at all. They're just good at these challenges. So I think Jag and Jazz have a really good shot at starting to do better than Tucker and Eric. But we'll see. In third place, who jumped up a little bit, was Joseph and Adam. They started in fourth, although they started in fifth. So yeah, they did jump a lot. What happened at the beginning of the episode when they had to fly to Romania? Joseph and his brother and Natalie and her sister all got to the travel agency at the same time, but there was only enough tickets for 4 teams to get on the first flight to Romania. And even though Natalie and Stephanie got there first, Joseph and his brother gave the passports to the guy first, and so they kind of screwed Natalie over, which was kind of what Natalie gets for the last episode, still wanting to be so pro-alliance. So that was actually good to see. Kind of glad Natalie got screwed over, which we'll talk a lot more about Natalie at the end of this video. But yeah, Joseph and Adam did a lot better than usual. They also had the highlight of the episode. I did laugh when they were on the same plane with Taylor. Well, Joseph was on the same plane with Taylor to skydive. And the first thing he says before, or the last thing he says before jumping out to skydive is, "Taylor, I love you." You know, I've been making a lot of fun of if Joseph and Taylor were ever an actual item. But that was funny and cute that Joseph said that before he jumped off the plane. And they did good with the sheep as well. And then they started following Jag and Jazz for navigating. But that was when Jag and Jazz got lost. So that didn't quite work out. They also chose to make the bricks. They struggled with the bricks. Their shit bricks were not smooth. So their first try, 5 of the bricks were not right. But they still got it together enough in time to finish third. In fourth place was Kyland and Taylor. And I felt like they were doing good with the sheep, but then one of their sheep jumped over the fence, which was crazy. But they still finished the sheep third. They had some communication problems in this episode. Kyland was getting annoyed with Taylor's navigation, that she was not telling him the right turns. In the edit, it made it seem like Kyland was right and Taylor was wrong. I don't know if that's true, that Taylor was not doing a good job of telling Kyland where to turn when he was driving. And then Kyland's autism was helping him be a perfectionist during the bricks, which I think Taylor was hoping Kyland would do faster, but it was probably for the best that Kyland took his time, even though he still messed up 2 of the bricks. But they end up in fourth. And like I said, I'll give Taylor a little less crap for giving Jag that pass early on, because Jag and Jess did try to work with them a little in this episode. So it wasn't all for nothing. But I think Taylor's getting a bad edit, honestly. I feel like Taylor has one of the worst edits this season, which is strange for Miss CBS herself to have a bad edit on a CBS show after they give her all these opportunities with BB Unlocked and everything. But, the best thing I can say for Taylor is I like watching her run around in her leggings the entire show so far. She looks way better than anyone else in leggings on this show. So I'll give her that. Next up is Chelsea and Jack. I always have the least notes on Chelsea and Jack. I don't know why. I just think they're not the most interesting team. They kind of just did mediocre in this episode, and they've kind of just been a mediocre team the entire time. They finished the sheep in 5th place. They did the bricks, had 5 wrong at first. The end of the episode was exciting because everyone was having trouble navigating to the last checkpoint of the round. And they ended up beating Izzy and Paige in a foot race to get 5th. But that means they were really close to Izzy and Paige. And Izzy and Paige is who we'll talk about next, who was in 6th place. And they're the only team that chose to do the art, which I think ended up being a good idea because the bricks was a lot more physical than I think some of the teams were expecting, especially Natalie and her sister. And like I said, my notes here is Izzy finally got to confront Jag and rub it in his face that they're still there. They really sucked with the sheep, though. They definitely did the worst of the sheep. Their strategy was kind of to let most of the sheep into the small area and then get the sheep that were not painted in blue out, rather than just trying to get the sheep painted in blue in like every other team did. And I think that's why they struggled the worst. But like I said, they're the only team that chose the masks. Once again, this team, Izzy and Paige, have such great chemistry as a couple, and their communication is so calm and so good. They're so good for each other. They really understand each other, and it's nice to watch. I mean, I think they're soulmates, if I've ever seen soulmates. So good on Izzy and Paige. And they keep skating by barely at the end, which is great because I love Izzy. It was another round where they barely were not last place, but I'm happy they were not last place. And they lived to fight another day. So good on them. And once again, we had it said that this might be a round where someone's not eliminated, but they still were. And I still contend the show is waiting for Izzy and Paige to get last place so that they can get a save and stay on the show. Because the show would be harder to watch without Izzy and Paige. At least for me personally, I would struggle to watch or care to watch without Izzy and Paige still in the game. Natalie and Stephanie get last place. And as I said when I talked about Joseph and his brother, Natalie finally realized when they got screwed out of getting on the first flight to Romania that maybe the alliances thing wasn't working out. And you would think she would have got that in the last episode when her sister was trying to tell her that the numbers are dwindling down, but she didn't. Natalie's mentality this whole episode was just obnoxious to watch. I talked about last week how she speaks in a baby voice a lot. And this episode, she was acting like a baby, period. Her sister has to baby her. And I will say there was some times in this episode Natalie was right about Stephanie, and Stephanie's communication was a little not there. But I think Stephanie was trying to hold it together to not go off on Natalie. She had the patience of a saint with all the whining that Natalie was doing in this episode with her whiny little baby voice. Natalie got pissy that Stephanie wasn't speaking enough to her when trying to get to places or when to park, which she was right about, that Stephanie didn't read where they needed to park during, I think, the bricks maybe. And then at one point, Stephanie did get her stick stuck in the water when they had to be on the plantoon to get to the clue. But I want to commend Stephanie's patience for Natalie whining this entire episode, especially with the manure. She complained the entire time they had to make the bricks. Stephanie was just trying to do her best, but the best wasn't good enough in the end, and they did get last place, and they were eliminated. And I think it was Natalie's fault. I mean, to be fair, in this episode, Stephanie did make a lot of mistakes, but I still contend that Natalie was too serious about the alliance last episode, and we saw Stephanie trying to talk her out of it. Then, because of Natalie, her and her sister finished right before Joseph and Adam, so that into last night's episode, those two teams got to the travel agency at the same time, and then Natalie got screwed because of that. So, in the end, Stephanie was more right than Natalie, even if Stephanie made some mistakes in this episode. But I'll be happy to not hear Natalie's baby voice again next week. And overall, decent episode. We're still trucking along here watching Amazing Race. I think there's only two teams that could actually win, and that's Tucker and Eric and Jeg and Jazz. I mean, Kyland and Taylor are a possibility if their communication gets better than it was in this episode. Joseph and Adam could be the long shot, but we've seen too many times them getting lost navigating, and I can just see that happening. Plus, they never can beat Tucker and Eric or Jeg and Jazz in a foot race. So, yeah.